Nerd alert! Learning is important, right?
Yes, exactly.
What a bunch of nerds.
Nerd alert!
Right.
Marketing Architects.
Hello, and welcome to the Marketing Architects, a research-first podcast dedicated to answering your toughest marketing questions. I'm Elena Jasper, I run the marketing team here at Marketing Architects, and I'm joined by my co-host, Rob DeMars, the Chief Product Architect of Misfits and Machines.
Hello.
Hello, we're back with your weekly Nerd Alert. Every week, I'll take a deep dive into academic marketing research and translate its complex ideas into simple, understandable language for Rob and, of course, for all of you. Are you ready to nerd out, Rob?
Elena, I am running on caffeine and questionable data sets, so let's go.
Perfect. Let's get into it. This week, I read a paper titled Symmetry, Scaling Laws, and Phase Transitions in Consumer Advertising Response. This is by Javier Marin, published in 2024. This study borrows ideas from physics to rethink how we measure consumer response to advertising. So Rob, but first, I want to ask you this. Have you ever seen an ad go from working really well to suddenly just stalling out, as if it hit an invisible wall, rather than just tapering off gradually as you spent more?
Because I've worked so long in television, my answer might be skewed, but it tends to be that if you have a really good piece of creative, that it has a pretty long life because there's a lot of different media that you can explore, and it's hard to spend your way into a point where it burns out quickly. That being said, I have seen ads that at first you think it's kind of like a false positive are popping, and then when you try to scale them, they immediately tank. So I don't know if that answers your question. It's more the taper than just hitting a wall.
No, that's interesting. And this research might present something different for you to consider.
Good. All right.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. So what they did was they looked at consumer response, but instead of treating it like a smooth curve, which is often how we think of it, he argues that it behaves more like a phase transition in physics. So think water suddenly turning to ice or steam. The idea is that advertising responses have critical points where the system shifts dramatically from growth to stagnation. So that doesn't mean that an ad couldn't have a long life or work for a long period of time. But he's saying instead of those traditional kind of S curves or concave models that capture advertising effects, those effects show diminishing returns. So more spend leads to smaller gains. But he thinks that these models often miss two realities. The first is saturation effects, where ads just stop moving the needle. Mm-hmm. And the second is tipping points, where consumer response changes sharply. To capture this, he introduces a new equation that blends scaling laws from physics with concepts from social psychology. The model introduces three new parameters. The first is what he called marketing effectiveness, which is how much consumer response scales with spend. High values mean small changes in spend drive big shifts. So it's kind of like how effective was the ad. The second is response sensitivity, how fast a channel reaches saturation. A high beta means that you hit diminishing returns quickly. So we've seen, scale on TV. You typically spend on TV, you might have more scale, right, than a digital channel. And the third was behavioral sensitivity, which is how interconnected the audience response is. A high gamma means network effects, like the audience is moving together like a viral cascade. So Rob, which of these three do you think matters most in the real world? Marketing effectiveness, response sensitivity, or behavioral sensitivity?
It's so hard. I'm gonna go with one, but with a caveat that the power of a great CPM to drive response matters. But just other tactics aside, I'm just gonna go with marketing effectiveness.
I'm gonna say you're right. Because for TV,
you gotta think about that.
It's a trick question because it kind of depended which one mattered the most. But for TV, you're right. Marketing effectiveness. It showed the highest in that category, which meant small changes in spend triggered big shifts in response. So I will say you're right about that. But he did test this. He ran simulations with dummy ad spend data sets and compared his new model against two classic models, which are called the Michaelis-Menten model and the Hill equation, which neither of us really need to know what that is.
None of these things I've ever heard of.
Yeah, you and I wouldn't know
the
that.
Hill equation. I'm glad he brought that up.
The first one's from chemistry. I'm like, yeah, okay. I couldn't remember chemistry from high school if I tried. But what he did was He fed each model to the same spend response data and then looked at which matched reality better. His new model captured both the early growth and the eventually flattening out more accurately, while the older models tended to exaggerate the high end and miss the low end. So, for example, in one dataset, TV showed the highest marketing effectiveness, which meant small changes in spend triggered big shifts in response, but print ads had a high behavioral sensitivity. So that suggested that while response saturated quickly, the audience acted together, almost like a tight-knit social group. This study is a little confusing. So what does it mean for us? First, know your saturation point. Every channel has one. If you keep pushing past it, you might be wasting your money. This model gives us a way to pinpoint where that wall might be. We've covered that before on this show. Channels have different points of diminishing returns. Again, not to plug TV too much, but we have found that TV has a higher level than most other channels. Think in tipping points, not just averages. So consumer response, it's not always linear. Sometimes you cross a threshold and that system behaves differently. So campaign planning should anticipate these jumps. And finally, network effects matter. Behavioral sensitivity tells us whether audiences move independently or as a herd. So if you have an audience that's more clustered, like maybe they're fans of a certain genre, they're a tight-knit social group, your creative can make an impact faster, which makes sense. If you're reaching an audience that's close, has a lot of word of mouth, your impacts are going to move quicker. All right, time for the Rob GPT. Imagine advertising like heating a pot of water. At first, nothing much happens. It just gets warmer slowly. But the moment you hit a boiling point, everything changes. Suddenly the water is bubbling like crazy. This study says consumer response works the same way. It's not just about pouring in more heat or ad spend. It's about knowing when you're close to boiling over or when you've already evaporated your budget into thin air. All right, Rob, what'd you think of that one?
This was so smart, it was hard for me to metabolize. Because the analogies are so foreign to me, because as someone who barely got through high school and college. But I would be curious to hear some real world examples of the phenomenon occurring. Oh, I get it. And maybe even breaking down some of those on what did it mean then when it dropped off or whatever. But
yeah,
it's interesting. It's just, like I said in the beginning, it hasn't been something that I feel like I've experienced a lot with television, but it also could be the channel.
I think so. I could think of, for us personally, there's been some digital ads where all of a sudden it seems like it hits a wall. That was performing well one day and then it's done. I think with what we found with advertisers on TV is advertisers are typically updating their creative way before they would need to. There's been more research on that. We found it takes an enormous amount of spend to truly get to the point where you're like, all right, we need fresh creative. Yeah, so I think that's probably why we felt it less, because that wall, the tipping point for TV is just a lot further than a digital ad might be.
And both in message and spend, it's hard to spend your way into saturation with some categories, at least. There's a lot of media to test and audiences to reach.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting, though. That's it for this episode of The Marketing Architects. We'd like to thank Taylor De Los Reyes for producing the show. You can connect with us on LinkedIn, and if you like the podcast, please leave us a review. Now go forth and build great marketing.
Marketing Architects.